Hello, friends and audience members. Welcome back to Tony and Leona Live. I'm Leona.
And I'm Tony. In this video, we will look at the recent trial of those who murdered Ahmaud Arbery. In a separate video, we will look into the trial of Kyle Rittenhouse. We are posing the question, what can Christians learn from these two cases? Before we do, we would like to ask you to subscribe to our channel and like this video. It really helps us to grow and get the word out.
As Christians and Catholics, we are increasingly finding ourselves in the crosshairs of the American culture war, being forced to choose sides through confrontations on social media, religious groups, schools, within familial relationships, and even within marriages. Too often, it appears these choices fall right or left in the familiar bipartisan spectrum created by politicians and the mainstream media. But is the right and left paradigm the correct way to view these issues, or do we need to look at these issues through the prism of Christianity and Catholic social teaching?
In the immediate aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, for the first time in recent memory, it seemed like everybody united, the right and the left, and uniformly condemned the inhumane way the Minneapolis police treated George Floyd while he was in custody. We were all horrified by the video showing the murder by former Minneapolis policeman Derek Chauvin. It was one of these rare moments where all of America and the world seemed to be in agreement that what we saw in that video was not okay. Rightfully, people were furious, and as leaders like Governor Walz and local media outlets like WCCO fanned the flames of racism rather than assuring people that justice would be served, outrage turned into riots and spread across the country and world. It was at this point where unity was dissolved and it was replaced with the storm cloud of bipartisan division.
The murder of Ahmaud Arbery was different from that of George Floyd. In the days and weeks that followed Ahmaud's murder, very few knew Arbery's name. There was no video uploaded online of his death, no protests, no arrests were made, no charges brought forth, and there was not much of an investigation into what happened. A good old boys club seemed to be in place, shielding Arbery's killers from the law. Gregory McMichael, the father of the man who murdered Ahmaud, and who was himself present at the murder and has now been convicted of murder, had worked as an investigator under the Brunswick area DA for over 30 years.
That's right. One of the first calls Gregory McMichael made was to District Attorney Jackie Johnson, who instructed local police not to arrest Travis McMichael. Within the first 4 days of the killing, Jackie recused herself from the case because she had worked directly with Gregory for many years while he was an investigator at the DA's office. On April 3rd, 2020, the second prosecutor assigned to the case, George Barnhill, recused himself and in a letter said the three men had, quote, solid first-hand probable cause, end quote, to pursue Arbery. On April 13th, 2020, Thomas Durden, DA for Georgia's Atlantic Judicial Circuit, announced his intention to present the case to Glynn County Grand Jury for, quote, for consideration of criminal charges. This letter was released on the same day that the video of the shooting shot by William Bryan, who was later charged, was leaked to a local media outlet in Brunswick.
In our opinion, there are a lot of questions that need answers and problems that need solutions with the DA's office in Brunswick. This also raises questions about other investigations, specifically investigations into open and closed cases that involve the deaths and severe injury of Black people and people of color. Are there more cases such as this that resemble intentional or unintentional lynchings or crimes committed by white vigilantes or neighborhood watchdogs against people of color? The State Attorney General of Georgia, Chris Carr, a Republican, played a very important role intervening and taking actions that led to Ahmaud's case moving forward toward its outcome. Chris Carr requested an investigation into possible misconduct by Jackie Johnson, the very first prosecutor who recused herself, as Tony said a moment ago. According to CBS News, the indictment says Johnson violated her oath by, quote, showing favor and affection to Greg McMichael and failing to treat Ahmaud Arbery and his family fairly and with dignity. It also says she obstructed police by, quote, directing that Travis McMichael should not be placed under arrest. Jackie Johnson was later arrested and charged for obstruction of justice.
There are many reasons why this case went from unknown to hitting the national spotlight. I think that a lot of why this case finally went on as it should have was the love and support at the grassroots level from people who did not give up. It started with the love and dedication of Ahmaud's mother, her pain and perseverance, those who surrounded her, her church, their family, the friends, all their prayers, the local coverage. A hashtag I Run With Maud was set up where people could run virtual jogs on what would have been Ahmaud's 26th birthday, and petitions began to circulate online.
The very first petition that I signed for a trial to even take place after Ahmaud was murdered was a petition that Allie Beth Stuckey, a conservative Christian podcaster, shared. I didn't even follow her at the time, but a friend of mine shared the petition from Allie Beth Stuckey. The second petition I signed was shared by Sean King, someone who has almost completely opposite views than Allie Beth Stuckey on many topics. It's interesting and encouraging that both of these very different influencers immediately saw how appalling it was that those who killed Ahmaud were not even arrested for several months after the murder.
A local story in April, followed by the New York Times article published in late April, did a lot to push this story into the national spotlight. After a public records request, the Brunswick News reported details of the Glynn County Police Department's records on the shooting. The police report was based almost entirely on the responding officer's interview with Gregory McMichael. The records claimed that after the McMichaels pursued Mr. Arbery, Travis McMichael and Mr. Arbery started fighting over the shotgun, at which point Travis fired a shot, and then a second later, and there was a second shot. This was the original New York Times article titled "Two Weapons, a Chase, a Killing, and No Charges. A 25-year-old man running through a Georgia neighborhood ended up dead. A prosecutor argued that the pursuers should not be arrested."
Travis McMichael, who shot Ahmaud, must have been feeling the pressure at this point. His defense lawyer at the time released or leaked the video to the press, and it was widely viewed and shared, expediting media coverage and public support. A few days later, according to the New York Times, Gregory and Travis McMichael were arrested at home on May 7th and were booked into a jail in Glynn County. Both men were charged with murder and aggravated assault.
On May 21st, the man who filmed the fatal encounter between Mr. Arbery and the McMichaels was arrested, being charged with felony murder and criminal attempt to commit false imprisonment.
One important person to note for his preparedness for this moment, his actions and key decisions that were made that led to the escalation and successful procurement of the case, is the State Attorney General of Georgia, Chris Carr. He took several important actions. 1. Mr. Carr, a Republican, urged the Justice Department to initiate a sweeping investigation into the case. 2. Mr. Carr appointed the fourth and final prosecutor to handle the case, Joyette M. Holmes, the district attorney in Cobb County, a populous Atlanta suburb, where she is the first African American to hold this office. 3. Mr. Carr requested that the Georgia Bureau of Investigation investigate possible prosecutorial misconduct by Mr. Barnhill and Miss Johnson.
I totally agree. Attorney General Carr was prepared for this moment. He had the ability to see this case for what it was and the good judgment to take actions that would lead to a just outcome and to also earn the trust of the American people. This does not happen very often in big national cases like this. The media treated this one differently, which I think helped to set a serious and somber tone around this case. Although it could have been done, there was not so much demagoguery and demonization that we're used to. It could be perhaps that because the Kyle Rittenhouse case was occurring simultaneously, that the mania and the demagoguery were focused on that. Or maybe it was God's hand in this case to start the healing process and amends and the good that could come out of this senseless killing. It did seem, and still does seem, a little strange that here we had a horrific and to us pretty clear case of a racially driven killing that resembled a lynching and an active cover-up by government of this killing, yet so many of the anti-racist and mainstream media were not focused on this case. And instead, they were out there comparing Kyle Rittenhouse to a white supremacist.
Yeah, I kind of thought so as well, but the bottom line is that with Ahmaud, all three of these men were found guilty of murder by a mostly white jury. There were 11 white people and one black person on the jury. Some were saying at the selection of the jury that it was rigged, quick to come to judgments that the racial makeup of the jury would render their decisions.
See, I didn't really understand that because both the prosecution and the defense are equally involved in the jury selection process. The prosecutor who was ultimately assigned to this case, Joyette M. Holmes, she's highly capable, and she was specifically selected because of her background. And the prosecution is directly involved with jury selection. So this means she did not object to these jurors for whatever reasons. But presumably, we can believe that she believed these jurors would be impartial when determining the facts and rendering a judgment.
For our system of justice to work and for members of society to coexist peacefully, we need to name and root out injustices in our system and extensively audit any issues where justice does not seem to be served or where realities are ignored. But I do not see how working to dismantle all branches of law enforcement rather than naming and fixing injustices within it has become the quote unquote accepted way to work towards justice.
I wouldn't say that that's the accepted way, though, because really the defund the police movement is losing a lot of steam. You're seeing a lot of cities actually reversing course in this policy, for instance, in Portland, Oregon, and even in Minneapolis. And it's also important to note that the McMichaels were not law enforcement. They were acting as vigilantes. So one of the problems with defunding the police is it actually gives rise to neighborhood watchdogs and vigilantes. And I think that's exactly what we don't need because of exactly this case of what we saw, where these people are taking it upon themselves to stop someone who they believed was committing a crime and potentially making that belief based off of the person's skin color and trying to detain that person. Like, that's where the problem originally started. So it's encouraging to see that the citizens arrest law was scaled back in Georgia.
We spend so much time fighting each other, but I think we need to realize that there are some good ideas on both sides of the aisle. In this case, I think there was a systemic problem within the DA's office. That should not be ignored. We also should not ignore that there were people within this system who recognized and rooted out the systemic injustices in order to bring this case to, I think, a just conclusion. I really think we would all be better off if we strive to specifically identify problems and then address those problems, rather than calling a swath of people a name and acting as if people we think we disagree with are not also working for solutions.
Ahmaud Arbery should still be alive today. Very few people, including those who killed him, would disagree with this statement. Racism probably had a lot to do with this case, and we shouldn't dismiss racism as a factor, as if racial bias and injustice does not exist. The reason why Arbery was pursued is because there was video surveillance of a black male entering into a home that was under construction over a period of days, fit the description of Arbery. But at the same time, this is common practice. Many people go into homes that are under construction in that area to check out the design, the structure, how they're building it, or just out of curiosity. And it almost seemed that because Arbery was black, that warranted an extra amount of suspicion. Also, a 911 call was placed where Travis McMichael said that there was a black man running in the neighborhood. He didn't tell the 911 dispatcher about any crimes that were being committed. It just gave the implication that what Arbery was guilty of was running while black in this white neighborhood, somewhere where he shouldn't have been. And finally, the other aspect of clear racial bias was the DA's office and their failure to fully investigate and bring charges in a timely manner. So it's just something that we need to recognize, that this does exist, but there's also ways to combat it, and the responsibilities lie on good people, on Christians, and people being aware.
The activism behind this case to bring attention to it, and also the actions of both good actors and bad actors within the Georgia government, all contributed to its outcome. I think it's really important that we all recognize the good that was done by many people. The activism was peaceful and nonviolent, and it involved people from diverse backgrounds and belief systems. As I was sharing earlier, I first heard about Ahmaud and what happened to him from people with very, very differing views on many political issues. So in this case, the system actually did work, but it needed to be pushed along through pressure from loved ones, activists, churches, religious and political people, and I think also through some really good journalism. Imagine if journalism was always done in that way.
And when the system does work, we need to celebrate it because it's all we have at the end of the day is the American system of criminal justice. There is no proposal for any other better way to do it. So instead of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, we need to perfect the system that we have because inherently it is just and equal. It's the actors involved that can create the systemic injustice. So it worked in this case.
But did it work for Kyle Rittenhouse?
We'll find out in our next video. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.